Margaret Thatcher was born on October 13, 1925 in Graham, England. She graduated from Oxford University as a chemistry major, but she has always had a flair for politics. 2 years after graduating college, she made her first bid for public office. In 1952, she started studying law after being married to Dennis Thatcher. In 1959, she won a seat in the House of Commons that also led to her appointment as Secretary for Pensions and National Insurance. In 1974, she became the leader of the Conservative Party, and in May 1979, she was appointed as the first female Prime Minister of Britain. So why is Margaret Thatcher called the Iron Lady? It was a term coined by the Russian journalist who intended it to be an insult towards the female prime minister. However, by the time she left the office, it became a nickname as a constant opponent against the Soviet Union. This title accurately describes the politician due to her reforms and programs and her fierce reputation as a ruthless leader. Margaret Thatcher was hated due to her reforms on collapsing several of the manufacturing enterprises in the country. Britain was a socialist economy back then. Its economy was centrally planned with key enterprises that were owned by the state, and unions were far more dominant than they are today. Margaret Thatcher sold many of these state enterprises and allowed many of the unprofitable enterprises to collapse. Because of this, Thatcher and the government were seen to have done so little to help those livelihoods that were destroyed by her reforms. She also supported the retention of the death penalty. She believed that the death penalty should be the consequence for taking others' lives. She also caused the poll tax disaster, which is the unequivocal disaster of the Thatcher government. This was a reform that suggested that the burden of the tax was to be moved from the rich towards the poor. This reform was universally hated and that led to the series of mass anger, public disobedience, and some of the worst riots England has ever seen. It took several years before the poll tax reform was abolished. She was also part of the Conservative Party that created the infamous Section 28 legislation, which discourages any teaching of homosexuality acceptance and distribution of homosexuality materials. This caused a major uproar to the LGBT community, who feels discriminated by the new reform. It caused a feeling of resentment and distrust among the members of the LGBT community that increased their dislike towards the Thatcher government. How did neoliberalism, fascism, authoritarianism, and populism lead to the creation of the comic book V for Vendetta? V for Vendetta envisions a dystopia with startling parallels to British society during the early 1980s and set in a post Margaret Thatcher England. Alan Moore drew heavily from the image of Thatcher in her tyrannical administration. Moore's envisioned dystopia closely resembles the chaos that surrounded Moore himself in the 1980s. Large-scale rioting started in April 1981 in a predominantly African and Caribbean ethnic area of South London, Brixton, where more than 1,000 police in riot gear battled some 600 black West Indian youth. These riots were directed against the repression of white authorities, the totalitarian nature of Thatcher administration. Moore then integrated anti-fascist and disestablishmentarian violence into V for Vendetta. Moore, a self-confessed romantic anarchist, believes in the social efficiency of anarchy. Moore has a deep distrust in Britain's parliamentary system because it produced Thatcher and thus enables the fascists to come into power. V for Vendetta parallels reality in its totalitarian, fascist, and anarchical aspects. Moore conveys his anarchist belief through the character of V with the desire to mold England as a land of do as you please. He also utilized the Norse Fire regime to make a commentary on the growing fascist and totalitarian presence in England. V for Vendetta is then considered as Moore's take on the 1980s fascism, anarchy, and Thatcherism. The branches of the Norse Fire government are the eye, the hand, the mouth, the nose, the ear, the finger, and finally the head. The hand manages its agents, the finger was the secret police, The eye was the visual surveillance division, the ear was the audio surveillance division, the nose was the police department, and the mouth was the propaganda division. The panopticon is a type of institutional building and a system of control designed by the English philosopher and social theorist Jeremy Bentham in the late 18th century. The scheme of the design is to allow all inmates of an institution to be observed by a single watchman without the inmates being able to tell whether or not they are being watched. Although it is physically impossible for the single watchman to observe all the inmates' cell at once, the fact that the inmates cannot know when they are being watched means that they are motivated to act as though they are being watched at all times. Thus, they are effectively compelled to regulate their own behavior. What then are the social conditions that lead to the rise of populist, fascist, and authoritarian leaders? Populism is normally, though not always, triggered by a charismatic leader who articulates the collective anxieties of the people. Collective frustration and anxiety may be summed up as follows. We did everything right, we went to school, worked hard, and now we're unemployed. We won't be able to collect retirement benefits, and our kids won't come close to doing as well as our generation. For fascists, first, there are people who are angry with the election results or how the country is being run. Then, they use militant tactics to force the population into supporting their cause, even though most citizens don't actually support the fascist agenda. Fascist leaders want to make their state strong and powerful. They claim that only the strongest and fittest in the population can survive. With the help of a strong army, they go to war and expand their territory. Authoritarian leaders typically make choices based on their own ideas and judgments and rarely accept advice from followers. What are the parallels between the world now and the world of V? For the Philippine setting, the Duterte administration has shown a lot of similarities with V for Vendetta setting.
Itong mga extrajudicial killings, baka in the future, maabuso talaga to na kahit sino na lang may atraso sa pulis, kaya sa kapitan, magko-contract na lang ng isang assassin, papapatayin na lang, and sasabihin na bibintangan na sila ay durugista.
Some examples are, first, the Philippine National Police, PNP abuse of power through extrajudicial killings. This is similar to what the fingermen can do with the approval coming from their leader. Second, the president's move to control the media, the ban on Rappler, and the cracking down of press freedom. The voice of faith should only be the one followed and heard by the citizens. Third, the government tries to run the society based on fear. If you criticize the government or the leader, you will be looked as an enemy. Citizens are forced to follow laws or orders from the government because they are afraid of what might happen to them if they don't. For the international setting, first would be the racism observed in Trump's administration. In the comic book, other cultures were eradicated, especially in terms of literature. Second would be cybersecurity or privacy invasion. According to James Comey, before his dismissal as an FBI director, there is no such thing as absolute privacy in America. There is nothing out of judicial reach. Similar to the story, the government knows and sees everything via surveillance in V for Vendetta.
So for the last question, are we going to be living in V's world soon? With the technology available to us today, we are not far from achieving the setting similar to V's world, where everything an individual does is being monitored. As we can see, our government is abusing their power to take control of the people. Today, the violation of human rights through extrajudicial killings is alarming. They instill fear to the people for us to conform and accept their way of governance. Considering these similarities, there is a possibility that we might experience the same setting in V's world in the near future.